Hello everybody, welcome to This Week in British History with me, Philippa Lacey Brewell. I am in yet again another filming location. This is my new office. As you can tell if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it's not finished yet, but I only moved in 2 days ago. So anyway, you're not here for the backdrop, you're here for the history. So let's get started. We're now coming toward the end of This Week in British History series. This is episode 51. Obviously there's 52 weeks in a year, so there will be 52 episodes, after which I'm going to be doing a monarchy series, as promised earlier back on in the year. And I will also be doing my new project, Brutal History, with Catherine Brooks, where it's a slightly less edited, I suppose, version of history, but we're going to be looking into some of the topics that possibly don't get covered in so much mainstream. So nothing will be barred. It will all be very fun, very entertaining, of course, extremely informative. So if you're interested in that, please keep an eye out for announcements here on my Facebook page and Instagram. Okay, now let's get on with this week's events in history. This week, the English Parliament passes the Bill of Rights, Charles Dickens' masterpiece A Christmas Carol is published, Catherine of Aragon is born, and Mary I is buried. So we've got a lot to cover this week. The first thing we're going to look at is the English Parliament passing the Bill of Rights on the 16th of December 1689. The Bill of Rights established limits on Crown power and also established the need for regular elections. We didn't just have one monarch on the throne at this time. This was the time of our joint monarchy between husband and wife, William III and Mary II. We're not long after the Glorious Revolution, which had occurred earlier on in the year. And this Bill of Rights was in fact a restatement of the Declaration of Rights, which had been presented to William and Mary earlier in the year. It was a requirement of them taking the throne as part of what is termed the Glorious Revolution. Not only did it limit Crown power, but it also shaped the political system that we are still familiar with today. So, for instance, it laid out things like basic civil rights, but it also laid out a constitutional requirement for the Crown to seek the consent of the people via their representation in Parliament, and that Parliament had a requirement to have regular Parliament, so regular sittings, regular discussions, etc., and free elections. There's also freedom of speech in Parliament, very important and always under threat. The rights of individuals laid out in there, and specifically looked at the prohibition of cruel or unusual punishments. I'm not quite sure what they were though. And also the re-establishment of the right of Protestants to have arms for their defence within the rule of law, and obviously that's quite specific to this time. And the introduction of a no right of taxation without Parliament's agreement, which actually echoes back to Magna Carta, no taxation without representation type idea. So that's interesting. I did a Magna Carta special. Magna Carta is obviously a massive topic. One of the interesting things about Magna Carta is it survived because of how it's been brought back to life at certain times and certain parts of it, and actually it's its essence that has survived, as opposed to it in its literal terms of what was written down in 1215. But anyway, if you want to look at the Magna Carta special, that is available. Also, Dan Jones has written a brilliant book about Magna Carta too. So that was the Bill of Rights passed by the English Parliament, on the 16th of December 1689. On the 19th of December 1843, Charles Dickens' masterpiece, A Christmas Carol, was published for the first time. Now, I don't think there are many Christmas cards. You think of the traditional idea of Christmas. It's quite Victorian, really, isn't it? And actually, it's very Dickensian. Whether he was representing or reflecting what was happening at the time, or whether he helped create that image, I don't know. But the idea of the snow, the hats, the traditional idea of Christmas, the Christmas cards I love to receive, those kind of scenes, very Dickensian. And of course his story, the Christmas Carol, the moral story of kindness and generosity and avoiding selfishness and materialism is really powerful, and of course nearly 200 years later, very poignant, very powerful and very relevant. So it was an incredible piece of work, and of course since it's been published it has been adapted for stage, as musicals, as plays, in storylines in other novels, even in the Muppets Christmas Carol, which any of you my age will remember. It's a story that I think speaks to everyone on some level, because it looks at someone's tragic past, it looks at how they're living now, and it gives them a glimpse of a future that they can still have an impact on, they can still change. And of course the main character is Ebenezer. Where did Je come from? Ebenezer Scrooge. He is a stingy miser, is what we could call him. So he's a moneylender. He has his rules and he sticks to them. There's no give and take. And he becomes very rich on the back of other people's downfalls, I suppose. But all legal within the law. It's the moral side of his story that's the one that is to speak to everybody. And he has tragedies in his life. He'd lost his mother at an early age, and he'd lost his best friend, his partner in his business. He had lost the love of his life because he was so work oriented, so materialistic, so money oriented, should I say. I don't think you could probably actually describe him as materialistic, because I don't think the character really spent much money on anything. It was more about hoarding. And he is visited by a series of ghosts over one Christmas Eve night. The ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. Now, I don't need to go into the story of it here, but you basically see him going through that transition, realising the bits of his life which have caused him to be this way, and giving him the choice as to how he would like to proceed. And the lovely part of the story, of course, is he decides to go down the route of love and generosity and kindness. And so if you haven't seen the Christmas Carol, or even if you have, it's that time of year again. You need to get it out and have a watch. Interestingly, for a book, Christmas Carol has never been out of print, and of course it has been translated into several other languages as well, so it's a well-known story, and deservedly so. Overnight of the 15th to the 16th of December 1485, Catherine of Aragon was born in a palace just outside Madrid. Her parents were Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. Both her parents were monarchs in their own right. The kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were separate, only brought together by this marriage. Catherine of Aragon, of course, would go on to become the wife of Arthur Tudor of England and of his younger brother Henry VIII, and would be the mother to Mary I, our first crowned female monarch. And when her divorce from Henry came, when he started to try divorce proceedings, because he wanted a son, he saw the fact that he only had a surviving daughter, Mary, as God's punishment to him for marrying his dead brother's widow, and that he was punishing him with childlessness as he saw it, no male heirs. Catherine, if we see right from the very beginning, her mother was a queen in her own right. Catherine had a belief that Mary was heir to the throne. It kind of did it really matter? She was female. She was the rightful heir to the English throne. And I believe this goes right back to Catherine's parents and the precedent that they set, the impression that they set to their young daughter. Catherine was one of 4 surviving children. Isabella of Castile, her mother, was a very hands-on mother, and the children would be with them on campaign. So Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon were collectively known as the Catholic kings, and they went on crusade a lot. They pushed the Christian message and were recognised as such by the Pope, and hence the name the Catholic Kings. I've already mentioned Catherine was married to both of the Tudor brothers, Arthur, the eldest son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, and she was actually betrothed to him when she was just 3 years old. The Tudor dynasty were keen to have an alliance with such a powerful, influential family in Europe. Catherine was 15 when she stepped foot on English soil. She married Arthur Tudor in 1501, the same year that she came, and she unfortunately had only a very short marriage to Arthur. He died 5 months after their marriage. If you want to know more about their marriage, their wedding, and also the sad death of Arthur, I've covered both of those topics in previous episodes, so I will put a link below in the show notes so that you can listen again or watch again if you're on YouTube. I think that the position of her mother, Isabella of Castile, as a woman of huge influence and power, had a big impact on Catherine's belief about women in power. And way before this was an issue with her daughter Mary I taking the throne or being heir apparent to the throne of her father Henry VIII, which of course is what would have happened if Henry had remained married to Catherine. Catherine became an ambassador to the Aragonese court in 1507, so she was a young woman with the role of ambassador and the first known female ambassador in a European court. So I've covered Catherine a few times over the year, not least because of her marriage to Arthur Tudor, and also right back at the beginning of the year in January I covered the death and the burial of Catherine of Aragon. So another video for you to, or podcast for you to seek out if you're interested in listening to a little bit more about Catherine. In a previous episode, I talked about the death of Mary I and, of course, the accession of her half-sister, Elizabeth I. That was the 17th of November 1558. Well, on the 14th of December, Mary was buried at Westminster Abbey. Mary had wished to be buried with her mother at Peterborough Cathedral. And I spoke about the relationship between Catherine and Mary again in a previous episode, but they were close. Catherine had followed on from her mother, Isabella of Castile, as a very hands-on mother, and they were close. And when Henry VIII petitioned for divorce from Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, they were parted and they never got to see each other in life again. Even on Catherine's deathbed, Mary was not permitted to see her mother. And it's tragic, actually, to think it was important to her that she was interred next to her mother. Her mother's in Peterborough Cathedral, but that was not granted to her. She is buried in Westminster Abbey. And to add insult to injury, she is in a shared tomb. James the Sixth of Scotland, first of England, who came to the throne following the death of Elizabeth I, had Elizabeth interred in the same tomb as Mary. On top is an effigy of Elizabeth, and unless you read Latin and read the inscription around the tomb, you would have no indication that Mary is buried in that tomb whatsoever. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of This Week in British History. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you've subscribed, give it a thumbs up, comment below, even share it. Why not? Let's help me, please, get the word out about this channel. The series is for 2020, so there's, as I've said, there's 52 episodes, and the next one will be coming out next week, and the last one in the series, in fact, next week. So if you haven't seen them all, you've got a little bit of catching up to do. You can I don't know, wrap your presents to me in the background. Oof, maybe not. Well, I'll leave it up to you. It's there if you want it. But for now, until next week, take care, have a great week. I'll see you next time. Previous stories, oh my goodness, becomes a bank. Becomes a bank.
Akvem would be useful.